Hollywood likes its actresses polished and predictable. Media training, safe answers, perfect smiles on every red carpet. But there is a small group the studios never quite know how to handle. They give strange interviews, turn film sets into personal rituals, collect odd little objects for energy, and carry a vibe that makes even other actors a bit uncomfortable. Some fans call it raw authenticity. Others just call it weird. So, are these women misunderstood artists, or simply the strangest people ever trusted with a close-up? Stay with this countdown of the most weird actresses in Hollywood, and if you want more deep dives into the industry's most unusual stars, make sure you subscribe so you never miss the next story. 15. Eva Green. Eva Green is the kind of actress who makes people sit up a little straighter the moment she walks into a room. There is something unnervingly intense about her, something that feels closer to folklore than celebrity culture. Directors say she brings an atmosphere with her, a heavy, charged presence that changes the temperature of a set without her saying a word. She does not play at being mysterious. She simply is, and that natural severity is exactly what makes her one of the strangest, most compelling actresses working today. Her interviews alone are enough to confuse casual viewers. Eva speaks softly, precisely, and with a cool detachment that leaves journalists unsure whether she is being poetic or deadly serious. She drifts into dark themes without blinking, casually discussing fear, desire, shadows, and nightmares, as if they are normal topics for a press junket. She avoids small talk completely. There is no cheerful backstage banter, no forced warmth. Instead, she gives the impression of someone who spends more time in her own thoughts than in any shared reality. Her process as an actress only adds to her reputation. Eva prepares for roles through isolation, long silent walks, and a catalog of strange personal rituals she never fully explains. She keeps notebooks filled with symbols and intense emotional sketches, carrying them everywhere during production. She chooses characters who burn, break, or unravel, and she throws herself into them with such force that casters sometimes admit they are unsure where the performance ends and the real Eva begins. During darker roles, she has said she feels haunted, and crew members have quietly confirmed that she moves differently, speaks differently, and holds herself like someone under a spell. On set, she is polite but deeply private. She avoids crowds, keeps her distance between takes, and prefers dim corners where she can preserve whatever emotional state she is working from. She reacts strongly to loud noise or chaotic energy, needing calm before big emotional scenes. There are stories of her stepping away from set for a few minutes, returning with tears already streaming, ready to deliver a performance that shakes the room. No warm-up, no warning. Just pure, frightening commitment. At home, Eva lives as strangely as she works. She surrounds herself with occult books, dark art, and odd little collectibles that most people would find eerie. She avoids celebrity circles, rarely appears at parties, and spends her free time reading, drawing, or disappearing from public view entirely. She prefers candlelight over bright bulbs, solitude over crowds, and long, quiet evenings over anything glamorous. Friends say she is kind, loyal, and surprisingly funny, but that her inner world is deeper, darker, and more complicated than most people could ever imagine. Eva Green's weirdness is the quiet, powerful kind. It is not chaos. It is conviction. She moves like someone guided by her own mythology, untouched by Hollywood's expectations, and that makes her one of the most unforgettable personalities in the industry. 14. Anya Taylor-Joy. Anya Taylor-Joy has a presence that instantly stands out. She carries an unusual stillness, a kind of quiet intensity that makes people turn and look twice. There is something slightly unreal about the way she listens, the way she holds eye contact, and the way she reacts to small shifts in a room. Directors often say she feels like a performer who exists in two layers at once, one grounded in the scene, and another operating in a deeper emotional current no one else can touch. That duality gives her work a strange, magnetic tension. Her interviews reveal this immediately. Anya speaks softly and chooses words with an almost fragile caution. She often drifts into emotional descriptions instead of direct answers, turning simple questions into small philosophical reflections. She describes feelings through images, colors, or moments she remembers from childhood, creating a tone that feels both vulnerable and slightly distant. Interviewers sometimes mention the way she pauses mid-sentence, looking upward or to the side, as if she is trying to pull the rest of the thought out of a hidden corner of her mind. There is sincerity in everything she says, but also an unpredictability that leaves people unsure where the conversation will go next. Her acting process deepens this unusual atmosphere. Anya prepares for roles by isolating her senses. Certain songs on repeat, specific fabrics she keeps near her, dim lighting, long stretches of silence before emotional scenes. She keeps notebooks filled with symbols, tiny sketches, and fragmented lines that help her build the inner voice of a character. Crew members often describe her sitting alone, murmuring rhythms or repeating emotional cues under her breath, like she is tuning herself to a frequency only she can hear. Once she reaches that point, she can shift her entire posture and expression in a single breath, becoming someone completely different. On set, she is kind, calm, and polite, but people feel a faint boundary around her. During breaks, she prefers quiet corners, where she doodles shapes or reads poetry while staying in the emotional temperature of the role. Loud energy tends to push her inward, and she often steps away from crowded areas to reset her focus. Many casters say she has an ability to create an emotional bubble around herself, and when she steps into it, her presence grows sharper, more focused, and slightly unsettling in its intensity. Her personal world adds more texture to her strangeness. Anya surrounds herself with vintage objects, soft lighting, and items that carry emotional weight. Old postcards, forgotten books, hand-drawn notes. She prefers small gatherings over large events, late-night conversations over loud parties, and long solitary walks where she can process her thoughts. Friends describe her as gentle but difficult to fully understand, someone whose emotions run deep but quietly. Anya Taylor-Joy's weirdness is subtle, private, and deeply artistic. It is not an act. It is the natural rhythm of someone who experiences life with heightened sensitivity, and that quality is exactly what makes her unforgettable. 13. Mia Wasikowska. Mia Wasikowska has a quiet, restrained kind of weirdness that reveals itself slowly. She looks delicate and calm, yet people who work with her often notice an unusual emotional weight in the way she listens, observes, and moves through a room. She gives off an energy that feels slightly detached from the usual Hollywood rhythm, like she is always studying the world rather than participating in it. That distant, introspective quality is a big part of what makes her so compelling on screen and so undeniably unusual in real life. Her interviews show this immediately. Mia speaks softly and with long pauses, choosing her words with careful precision. She often answers questions by drifting into small memories, half-formed ideas, or quiet reflections that seem unrelated to the surface topic, but somehow reveal more about her inner world than a direct answer would. She never tries to entertain or impress. Instead, she communicates in a calm, almost fragile tone that makes the entire room quieter. Interviewers sometimes mention the way she goes still when thinking, focusing her eyes on a single point as though she is pulling the thought from deep inside herself. Her acting process adds even more texture to her unusual personality. Mia prepares for roles through isolation and deep emotional mapping. She keeps journals filled with short phrases, sketches, and small symbolic notes she uses to track the psychological movement of a character. She likes silence before heavy scenes, sometimes walking away from the crew for a few minutes to breathe, settle her thoughts, and allow the character's emotional shape to take over. Directors often note that she does not rehearse in a traditional way. She listens, she absorbs. Then she steps into the scene with a controlled intensity that does not look rehearsed at all. On set, Mia maintains a gentle, distant presence. She is polite and kind, but rarely loud or social. During breaks, she sits alone with a book, writes in her notebook, or simply stares into space while staying inside the emotional tone of the day's work. She reacts strongly to chaotic environments, preferring calm corners or quiet hallways where she can stay balanced. Costers say she can shift from warm conversation to complete silence in a heartbeat, not out of discomfort, but because she falls into deep thought so quickly. Her personal life matches that same introspective, slightly unusual rhythm. Mia avoids Hollywood parties, dislikes bright attention, and often disappears for long periods to travel, read, or work on small artistic projects. She prefers simple routines, quiet mornings, and long walks where she can think without interruption. Her home is filled with handmade items, second-hand objects, and personal notes she collects from places that mean something to her. Mia Wasikowska's weirdness is subtle, sincere, and rooted in deep sensitivity. She does not try to stand out. She simply operates on a quieter, more inward frequency, and that is exactly what makes her one of Hollywood's most intriguing and unpredictable personalities. 12. Saoirse Ronan. Saoirse Ronan has a soft, bright presence that often makes people underestimate how unusual she truly is. Beneath her polite calmness lives a mind that jumps between emotions, images, and strange little ideas with a rhythm entirely its own. She gives the sense of someone who feels things faster and deeper than most people, and that emotional sharpness creates a kind of gentle weirdness that follows her into every interview, film set, and conversation. Her interviews are the clearest window into this side of her. Saoirse talks with quick shifts in tone, moving from serious to playful in seconds. She sometimes answers questions with small stories that sound like fragments from a childhood dream. She describes emotions through sensory images, talks about characters like old friends she once met in passing, and often laughs at thoughts she does not fully share. She also has a habit of drifting into long pauses, gazing downward with a faint smile on her face, as though she has wandered into an inner memory she does not want to interrupt. This unpredictability makes her interviews strangely captivating. Her acting process reveals even more of her unusual inner rhythm. Saoirse prepares for roles by building emotional maps, playlists, handwritten notes, sketches, and symbolic objects that help her track a character's internal landscape. She listens to music on loop until certain emotions settle into her body, repeating lines in soft tones until the cadence locks into place. Crew members say she often isolates for a few minutes before each scene, breathing slowly, grounding herself, and tuning out everything around her. Once she reaches the right emotional temperature, she steps in front of the camera with a focus so clean and precise that people sometimes fall silent watching her transform. On set, she mixes warmth with a faint, unpredictable distance. She is friendly and approachable, but she also has moments where she slides inward, thinking so intensely that she does not hear someone calling her name. She fidgets with her hands, plays with small objects, or scribbles in a notebook between takes. She is sensitive to mood shifts in the room, instantly picking up tension or fatigue, and often adjusting her own energy to keep the atmosphere steady. Costers say she has a unique emotional intuition. She knows when someone is upset before they say a word. Her personal life mirrors this gentle oddness. Saoirse collects strange little items from second-hand shops, keeps old letters and postcards, and decorates her spaces with objects connected to specific memories. She prefers quiet evenings, long walks, and time spent journaling. Friends say she is easy to love, but difficult to fully read, a person whose thoughts are rich, layered, and often drifting somewhere just beyond the surface. Saoirse Ronan's weirdness is soft, emotional, and grounded in deep sensitivity. She sees the world in textures and moments rather than simple facts, and that unique way of processing life is exactly what makes her one of the most quietly eccentric actresses in Hollywood. 11. Florence Pugh. Florence Pugh has a grounded but chaotic kind of weirdness, a mix of sharp instincts, impulsive humor, and emotional intensity that makes her completely unpredictable on and off set. She looks approachable and easygoing, but people who work with her quickly notice a restless, kinetic energy underneath the calm surface. She reacts fast, thinks fast, and expresses herself with a kind of raw honesty that feels refreshing to some and slightly destabilizing to others. That balance between warmth and wild spontaneity is exactly what sets her apart. Her interviews show this clearly. Florence talks in quick bursts, often jumping from a serious topic to a sudden joke without warning. She laughs loudly, gestures dramatically, and tells stories with a kind of reckless enthusiasm that makes her unpredictable in the best possible way. She also gets distracted easily, drifting into small tangents about food, music, odd memories, or strange anxieties she remembers at the last second. She has no filter when she's excited, and that unpolished honesty creates a sense of delightful chaos around her. Interviewers often leave feeling entertained but slightly unsure of what just happened. Her acting process adds another layer to her unusual personality. Florence prepares for roles through intense sensory work. Cooking meals her character might eat, practicing breathing patterns, and using movement exercises to find emotional grounding. She keeps notebooks full of messy handwriting, quick sketches, and emotional notes that look more like a personal diary than a script breakdown. Before emotional scenes, she sometimes hums short melodies or paces in tight circles, searching for the right emotional temperature. Directors say she can shift her expression in a second, snapping into focus with a precision that feels almost too sharp for someone who was laughing only moments before. On set, Florence's energy fills the space around her. She bonds quickly with cast and crew, teasing them, hugging them, or spontaneously dancing when the atmosphere feels too stiff. But when she needs emotional depth, she retreats inward, holding her breath, closing her eyes, or tapping her fingers to steady herself. She forms emotional attachments to props, costumes, and certain corners of the set, returning to them repeatedly during breaks. Co-stars say she carries a mix of warmth and unpredictability, comforting one moment, chaotic the next, and always intensely present. Her personal life also reflects her strange charm. Florence collects quirky trinkets, fills her home with crafts she makes during late-night bursts of creativity, and cooks elaborate meals even at odd hours. She sings loudly in her kitchen, talks to her plants, and sometimes records videos in eccentric outfits just for fun. She has a stubborn independence and makes decisions based on instinct rather than industry expectations. Florence Pugh's weirdness is vibrant, emotional, and fiercely authentic. It comes from a personality that refuses to shrink, a mind that thrives on expression, and a spirit that embraces messy, unapologetic individuality. 10. Elle Fanning. Elle Fanning has a soft, porcelain kind of weirdness, gentle on the surface, but filled with small, eccentric habits that catch people off guard. She presents herself with grace and calmness, yet underneath that polished exterior is a quietly strange inner world shaped by daydreams, intense imagination, and an emotional sensitivity that does not match Hollywood's usual rhythm. People often underestimate how unusual she is, but anyone who has spent time with her recognizes the quiet oddness woven into the way she thinks and interacts. Her interviews reveal this side almost immediately. Elle tends to answer simple questions with poetic descriptions, drifting into imagery rather than facts. She speaks with a calm, breathy tone and sometimes pauses mid-thought, her eyes focusing on something far away, as though she is replaying a vivid memory only she can see. She laughs at ideas that nobody else heard, and she occasionally describes emotions through unusual comparisons, a feeling being warm at the edges or fluttering in the back of the mind. Interviewers often mention that she has a dreamy, floating quality, like her thoughts take unexpected paths before returning to the conversation. Her acting process makes her even more uniquely strange. Elle prepares for roles through sensory immersion, collecting objects that represent her character, lighting certain scents in her trailer, and listening to loops of soft music to find emotional balance. She fills notebooks with small sketches, single words, and scattered ideas that look chaotic but help her locate the emotional spine of each role. Crew members often see her murmuring lines in a slow, rhythmic pattern, adjusting her breathing or posture until she finds the right internal rhythm. Her ability to gently slide from herself into a character without any visible transition can make the moment feel unsettling in its subtlety. On set, Elle blends friendliness with a distant, drifting energy. She is warm and polite, but she also slips into long periods of silence where she seems lost in thought. She likes to sit in quiet corners, doodling tiny figures or practicing hand movements that only make sense to her. She hums quiet melodies between takes, often melodies that no one recognizes and she later admits she made up on the spot. She is sensitive to noise and emotional tension, pulling inward whenever the environment becomes overwhelming. Her personal life has the same dreamy oddness. Elle collects delicate little objects such as vintage trinkets, porcelain animals, and handwritten notes she finds in old books. She decorates her home with soft lighting, pale colors, and sentimental items arranged in patterns that reflect her mood. She loves late-night reading sessions, solitary walks, and quiet moments of imagination that she rarely talks about publicly. Friends describe her as sweet, gentle, and a little unpredictable, someone whose emotional world feels deep and slightly out of reach. Elle Fanning's weirdness is subtle and poetic. It is not loud or chaotic. It is the kind that comes from a mind tuned to softer frequencies, making her one of the most quietly unusual actresses in Hollywood. 9. Aubrey Plaza. Aubrey Plaza has one of the most unmistakable kinds of weirdness in Hollywood. Not soft, not subtle, but sharp, chaotic, and almost confrontational. She carries an energy that feels unpredictable from the moment she sits down. People never quite know whether she is joking, experimenting, annoyed, or simply entertaining herself. That offbeat presence is so strong that even seasoned interviewers struggle to stay in control of a room once she starts shifting the mood. Her interviews are where this strange aura becomes impossible to ignore. Aubrey often stares at the interviewer without blinking, letting silence stretch until the other person starts laughing from discomfort. She answers questions with cryptic one-liners, dark humor, or deadpan comments that sound like a dare. She changes her tone mid-sentence, breaks into odd characters, or responds in ways that make no logical sense but feel completely natural coming from her. The atmosphere around her becomes tense, awkward, and hilarious all at once. It is performance, personality, and instinct blended together. Her acting process adds even more layers to her odd reputation. Aubrey prepares by using emotional isolation, physical tension, and a kind of internal anchoring that focuses on discomfort rather than comfort. She likes characters who are fractured or confusing. She leans into their flaws, their impulses, their more disturbing traits. Crew members say she sometimes slips into a quiet stare before a scene, holding her breath or clenching her jaw while she channels the energy she wants. When the camera rolls, she flips into character with a suddenness that feels unnatural, like a switch has been thrown inside her. On set, Aubrey can be warm or cold, depending on the emotional weather she is holding that day. She jokes with crew members, then withdraws into silence without warning. She has odd habits, talking to herself in low murmurs, pacing in tight circles, or suddenly wandering off to examine something that caught her attention. She reacts strongly to certain sounds or chaotic environments, often pulling inward to reset. Costers say she mixes intensity with unpredictability, creating an atmosphere that keeps everyone alert. Her personal life mirrors this strange balance between sincerity and chaos. Aubrey loves odd artwork, thrift store objects that look haunted, and books filled with surreal imagery. She believes in energies and strange coincidences, openly admitting she feels drawn to ghost stories and emotional shadows most people avoid. She enjoys dark humor, uncomfortable jokes, and strange social experiments, often pushing boundaries just to see how people react. Friends describe her as deeply loyal but emotionally difficult to decode, someone who loves fiercely but hides large parts of herself behind layers of sarcasm and strangeness. Aubrey Plaza's weirdness is bold, sharp, and unapologetically real. She disrupts the room without trying, confuses people without effort, and remains one of the few actresses whose eccentricity is not a performance, but a signature part of who she is. 8. Jena Malone. Jena Malone has a handmade, artistic kind of weirdness, the kind that feels personal rather than performed. She has always moved through Hollywood with the energy of someone who builds her own world from scratch, shaping it with scraps of poetry, sudden impulses, and emotional layers that most people never show. Her presence is warm but unpredictable, gentle but full of strange corners, and that contrast is exactly what makes her stand out. Her interviews show this immediately. Jena talks in loose threads of thought, drifting from a practical answer into a metaphor or a quiet reflection without noticing the shift. She speaks in a soft, steady tone but chooses unusual phrases, turning emotions into images and small stories. She sometimes laughs at the middle of her own sentences, as if she realized something she does not want to explain. Interviewers often mention how she stares at the table or her hands while thinking, letting silence settle comfortably before returning with a thoughtful, unexpected reply. Her rhythm is slower, deeper, and more internal than typical Hollywood conversation. Her preparation for roles adds even more texture to her strange charm. Jena keeps notebooks filled with drawings, symbolic words, and fragmented lines she uses to build emotional pathways for each character. She lights candles in her trailer, listens to ambient sounds, and uses small rituals to find the mental atmosphere she needs. She has a habit of humming short melodies before heavy scenes, or repeating lines quietly until she finds the emotional tone she wants. Crew members say she often sits in complete stillness before a take, gathering her energy with a concentration that feels almost meditative. On set, Jena brings a calm, yet unpredictable presence. She is kind and collaborative, but she also drifts into deep focus without warning. During breaks, she walks in slow circles, touches props gently, or scribbles notes she never explains. She reacts strongly to emotional tension, adjusting her posture or breathing to settle herself. Costers say she has a sensitivity that makes her feel every shift in the room, and this instinct gives her performances a raw, quiet intensity. She also forms attachments to small objects on set, keeping them close throughout filming as emotional anchors. Her personal life only amplifies this gentle weirdness. Jena fills her home with handmade items, thrifted objects, and art pieces from local creators. She paints, writes poetry, experiments with music, and treats creativity as a daily ritual rather than a profession. She collects journals from different periods of her life, filled with sketches, confessions, and emotional maps. She loves long walks, spiritual workshops, and moments of stillness where she can let her mind drift. Friends describe her as emotionally open but also difficult to fully grasp, someone who feels deeply and expresses herself through art more than words. Jena Malone's weirdness is quiet, emotional, and deeply authentic. It comes from an inner world she never tries to hide, a world built from intuition and memory. She is one of Hollywood's most softly eccentric personalities, and if you're enjoying this countdown of Hollywood's strangest stars, remember to subscribe so you never miss the next deep dive. 7. Lily Rose Depp. Lily Rose Depp has a delicate, drifting kind of weirdness, the type that hides behind soft gestures and quiet expressions. At first glance, she seems fragile, stylish, and controlled, but people who spend time with her quickly notice something more unusual under the surface. She gives off the feeling of someone who never fully commits to the physical world around her. There is always a slight emotional distance, a dreamy pause, a gentle disconnect that makes her hard to read and strangely magnetic. Her interviews reveal this immediately. Lily Rose speaks in a low, whispery tone, often stopping mid-sentence to think longer than the moment requires. She tends to answer with emotional fragments, rather than full explanations, adding small memories or sensory descriptions that feels slightly mismatched with the question. She laughs quietly at thoughts she keeps to herself, or she glances into empty space with an expression that suggests she just drifted into an inner scene. Interviewers frequently mention how she slides between shyness and sharpness, switching moods with no warning, creating conversations that feel both fragile and unpredictable. Her acting process deepens this unusual aura. Lily Rose prepares by surrounding herself with soft lighting, specific scents, and objects that help her build a mood. She collects old photographs, handwritten notes, small pieces of jewelry, and other delicate items she believes hold emotional value. Before scenes, she sits alone with her headphones on, listening to music that sends her into the emotional climate she needs. Crew members say she often rehearses quietly to herself, using slow, controlled breathing to settle into character. Her transformation is subtle but eerie in its precision. Her eyes sharpen, her posture shifts, and she locks into the moment with an intensity that seems out of nowhere. On set, Lily Rose stays polite and gentle, yet she often feels unreachable. During breaks, she curls into a quiet corner, sketching shapes or reading faded books she brings from home. She rarely engages in big group conversations and instead chooses one-on-one exchanges or long stretches of thoughtful silence. She reacts strongly to loud or chaotic environments, pulling inward and needing space to reset. Costers say she carries an emotional softness that makes her sensitive to the energy around her, but also an unpredictability that keeps her from fully blending with the rest of the cast. Her personal life amplifies this dreamy oddness. She surrounds herself with vintage fashion, tiny keepsakes, perfume bottles, and half-written notes. She enjoys late-night creative sessions, wandering through her apartment with soft music playing, and decorating her spaces based on emotional intuition rather than design logic. She prefers intimate gatherings over loud social scenes and stays close to a small, carefully chosen circle of friends. People close to her describe her as thoughtful, observant, and emotionally layered, but also someone who keeps large parts of herself hidden behind quiet walls. Lily Rose Depp's weirdness is delicate and atmospheric. It is not loud or dramatic. It is built from sensitivity, drifting thoughts, and subtle emotional instincts, the kind of strangeness that whispers instead of shouts and lingers long after she leaves the room. 6. Zoe Saldana. Zoe Saldana has a fierce, restless kind of weirdness, the kind that hides beneath her confidence and sharp professionalism. She speaks with conviction, moves with intention, and shows emotion with a raw honesty that can make people around her feel slightly overwhelmed. There is an unpredictable fire in her personality, a constant storm of instincts and impulses that she tries to keep controlled but never fully silences. That inner turbulence gives her a unique, almost wild edge that sets her apart from Hollywood's polished expectations. Her interviews reveal this immediately. Zoe talks fast, thinks fast, and often jumps into deep topics without warning. She discusses ancestry, energy, emotional lineage, and intuition with the seriousness of a philosopher. When something bothers her, she says so bluntly, sometimes surprising interviewers who expect a safer answer. She uses her hands to emphasize every point, slicing the air with sharp gestures. Her emotions shift quickly. One second she is laughing, the next she is intense and focused, speaking like someone defending a personal truth. That emotional volatility is honest, bold, and undeniably strange in a world where most answers feel rehearsed. Her acting process adds another layer to her eccentric energy. Zoe prepares for roles through physical ritual grounding exercises, breathwork, and movement patterns that help her channel specific emotional states. She sometimes growls, shakes out her shoulders, or paces in tight circles to build tension before a scene. She keeps objects with her that hold symbolic meaning and uses them to anchor her focus. Directors say she forms a visceral connection to characters, absorbing their rage, grief, or passion in a way that feels almost too intense. When the camera rolls, she explodes into the moment, delivering performances that feel charged and volatile. On set, Zoe brings an unpredictable blend of warmth and force. She supports younger actors, checks in on crew members, and leads with generosity, but she also has moments where she retreats into herself, shutting out noise and people to stay emotionally aligned. She is sensitive to chaotic environments, reacting strongly to tension in the room, sometimes stepping away to rebuild her center. Co-stars say she can read emotional shifts instantly, calling out truth even when it is uncomfortable. Her ability to sense and confront energy makes her both respected and slightly intimidating. Her personal life reflects this same intensity. Zoe surrounds herself with objects connected to her heritage, photographs of family, symbolic jewelry, and art that carries emotional depth. She believes strongly in spiritual alignment, dreams, and generational memory. She journals obsessively, sometimes writing pages during sleepless nights. She is driven by instinct and deeply protective of her inner world, often preferring small gatherings, long conversations, and emotional honesty over Hollywood's glossy social scene. Zoe Saldana's weirdness is fierce, spiritual, and unapologetically vibrant. She lives with a heightened emotional awareness that shapes everything she does, making her one of Hollywood's most instinctive and compellingly eccentric actresses. 5. Margot Robbie. Margot Robbie carries a bright, high-energy weirdness that hides beneath her glamorous image. People see the polished red carpets and assume she is predictable, but anyone who has worked with her knows she has a chaotic streak that never completely shuts off. She is fast, impulsive, playful, and emotionally loud in a way that keeps everyone guessing. Her mind moves quickly, her reactions come out unfiltered, and her humor tilts into strange territory that makes her both charming and impossible to classify. Her interviews are a perfect example. Margot jumps into stories with zero preparation, telling odd childhood memories, weird fears, or deeply personal details without realizing how unusual they sound. She laughs at her own mistakes, forgets where she was in the story, then circles back with twice the enthusiasm. She also slips into accents or character voices randomly, sometimes mid-sentence, leaving interviewers trying to catch up. Her emotions float to the surface, constantly excitement, embarrassment, nerves, joy, all layered together with very little filter. It creates an atmosphere that feels spontaneous and slightly chaotic. Her acting process is equally unconventional. Margot prepares through sensory immersion, building playlists, touching certain textures, or practicing lines in exaggerated tones until she finds the version that feels right. She fills notebooks with messy handwriting, arrows, emotional cues, and strange little doodles that help her find the flavor of a character. She also practices physicality obsessively, shifting her walk, breathing pattern, and posture until she locks into the role. Crew members say that before intense scenes, she often talks to herself under her breath, pacing the room or squeezing props to channel tension. When the camera rolls, her focus snaps into place with startling speed. On set, Margot's energy affects everyone. She jokes constantly, breaks into dance during downtime, and invents bizarre games or inside jokes to keep spirits up. She forms quick emotional bonds with cast members, sometimes overwhelming them with affection or wild humor. But she also has moments where she retreats suddenly, pulling into her own head, adjusting her breathing, or staring at a prop while she resets emotionally. That unpredictable mix of extroversion and introspection makes her difficult to read but compelling to watch. Her personal life reflects these same quirks. Margot collects unusual items from her travels, fills her home with chaotic creative clutter, and spends nights cooking elaborate meals just because the impulse hits. She loves pranks, loud kitchen singing, and strange little rituals she developed over the years. Friends say she often makes up songs on the spot, talks to her pets like they are co-workers, and keeps sentimental objects that most people would throw away. She avoids Hollywood parties unless she feels emotionally aligned, preferring small gatherings, board games, and unplanned adventures. Margot Robbie's weirdness is bright, messy, and deeply human. It comes from honesty, impulsive creativity, and a refusal to present a polished version of herself. That raw unpredictability is what makes her one of the most irresistible and strangely fascinating actresses working today. 4. Lucy Hale. Lucy Hale has a subtle, anxious kind of weirdness, the kind that slips through in small gestures, shifting moods, and quiet instincts that make her feel slightly out of sync with everyone around her. She appears polished and approachable on the outside, but underneath that steady surface is a restless emotional current that never fully settles. People who know her well often describe her as sensitive, intuitive, and just a little unpredictable, with an inner world that feels far more complicated than she ever admits publicly. Her interviews reveal this unusual side quickly. Lucy answers questions with sincerity, but her thoughts sometimes curve into unexpected territory. She talks about dreams that stay with her for days, emotional vibrations she picks up from strangers, and fears that she can't easily explain. She pauses often, pressing her lips together or glancing downward while she reorganizes her thoughts. She also has a habit of sharing private details without realizing how vulnerable they sound, then laughing softly when she notices she's said too much. The rhythm of her conversation feels delicate, warm, open, but tinged with nervous energy. Her acting process adds even more depth to her strange personality. Lucy prepares for roles through emotional journaling, writing long letters from the character's perspective, or creating playlists that match their inner conflict. She keeps symbolic objects in her trailer, small items that help her build emotional continuity. Before intense scenes, she closes her eyes and breathes in slow, shaky rhythms until she feels the character forming inside her. Crew members say she sometimes mutters lines under her breath, repeating them with tiny emotional variations, like she's trying to unlock different versions of the same feeling. Her transitions into character are subtle but startlingly precise. On set, Lucy is friendly, but often retreats into small pockets of quiet. She prefers sitting alone during breaks, writing or staring into space, while she processes the emotional residue of a scene. She reacts to noise with quick flinches, to tension with silence, and to chaotic environments with a need to physically step back. When she reconnects, she does so gently, often apologizing for drifting away. Co-stars say she listens deeply, picks up emotional cues fast, and sometimes mirrors people's feelings without meaning, to a trait that makes her empathetic, but also makes her seem slightly overwhelmed. Her personal life mirrors this quiet oddness. Lucy is drawn to spiritual practices, tarot readings, moon cycles, and energy-cleansing rituals. She keeps crystals in her home, journals almost every night, and talks openly about her struggles with anxiety and how she manages emotional overload. She decorates her space with soft lighting, calm colors, and sentimental objects she collects during travels. Friends describe her as deeply loyal but private, someone who loves intensely but hides large parts of herself when she feels emotionally overstimulated. Lucy Hale's weirdness is gentle, nervous, and quietly complex. She lives with heightened emotional sensitivity that shapes the way she speaks, works, and connects with others. It is not dramatic or chaotic, just deeply human and subtly fascinating. 3. Kristen Wiig. Kristen Wiig has a peculiar, offbeat weirdness that never feels forced. Even when she is completely silent, there is something unpredictable, humming beneath the surface, a tension between shyness and absurdity that makes every interaction with her feel slightly unstable in a strangely delightful way. She is not loud or chaotic. Her weirdness is quieter, sharper, and built from instincts that don't follow the usual emotional patterns people expect in Hollywood. Her interviews are the clearest example of this. Kristen often begins speaking in a calm, polite tone, but within a few seconds, she drifts into humor, so dry it becomes hard to tell whether she's joking. She changes direction suddenly, answers questions with half-formed ideas, or slips into strange facial expressions at moments when most people would still be thinking of a response. She has long pauses where she stares at the floor or ceiling before returning with a comment that feels oddly philosophical or bizarrely random. Interviewers frequently say she is both one of the funniest and most confusing people they've ever spoken to. Her acting process deepens her unusual personality. Kristen builds characters through emotional observation rather than strict technique. She studies people quietly, noticing small tics, odd rhythms, and off-balance expressions, then stores them for later use. She keeps notebooks filled with short notes, odd quotes, and tiny sketches that help her find the emotional center of a role. Before takes, she often isolates for a moment, adjusting her breathing or her posture until she hits a very specific internal alignment. Directors say she is startlingly precise, shifting micro-expressions in ways that feel instinctive rather than rehearsed. On set, she can be social and warm, but she also disappears into long stretches of silence where she thinks intensely. She fidgets with props, doodles in small notebooks, or walks in slow, looping patterns while processing a scene. She responds strongly to energy changes, going quiet when the environment becomes tense and suddenly goofy when the atmosphere loosens. Costers say she is emotionally present but slightly unpredictable, a person who might crack a joke at the perfect moment or withdraw into a reflective calm without warning. Her personal life mirrors this subtle strangeness. Kristen avoids flashy Hollywood events and prefers quiet routines. She enjoys drawing, crafting odd little objects, and writing down random thoughts she finds amusing or revealing. Her home is filled with vintage pieces, soft lighting, and handmade items. She surrounds herself with things that feel personal and sentimental rather than stylish. Friends describe her as gentle, deeply introspective, and emotionally complex, with a sense of humor that often appears when least expected. Kristen Wiig's weirdness is soft, intelligent, and quietly disarming. She doesn't use it for attention, it simply lives in everything she does, shaping her performances and making her one of the most intriguing, unpredictable actresses in Hollywood. 2. Keira Knightley. Keira Knightley has a refined, cerebral kind of weirdness, the kind that hides beneath elegance, precision, and a collected exterior. She speaks with poise, moves with restraint, and carries herself like someone who has trained every gesture. Yet beneath that polished surface is a mind that never stops running, analyzing, and questioning everything. People who work with her often describe a subtle tension in the way she interacts, a restless intelligence that makes her seem slightly out of step with Hollywood's usual emotional temperature. Her interviews show this most clearly. Keira talks in long, winding thoughts that feel more like internal monologues than public answers. She often begins speaking confidently, then suddenly slows down, narrowing her eyes and reconsidering her own words in real time. She shares odd little confessions about pressure, fear, or emotional disconnect, not for shock value but because she is genuinely trying to articulate something complicated. She also has a habit of drifting into dead serious reflections that catch interviewers off-guard, discussions about identity, artistic purpose, or the psychological impact of fame. The mood around her becomes quiet and thoughtful, even when the original question was simple. Her acting process adds depth to this unusual presence. Keira prepares for roles with intense mental structure. She breaks characters down into emotional patterns, contradictions, and psychological triggers, filling notebooks with detailed diagrams and written explorations. She uses silence to center herself, closing her eyes and pressing her fingertips together while she processes a scene. She studies historical context obsessively, even for fictional roles, needing to understand the emotional architecture of the world she is stepping into. Directors say she builds performances like puzzles, piece by piece, with minimal outward expression until everything falls into place. On set, Keira stays polite but slightly guarded. She keeps her distance during chaotic moments, choosing small, isolated spaces where she can think clearly. She reacts strongly to loud energy, preferring calm environments where the emotional tone is stable. Co-stars mention the way she slips into deep concentration at unpredictable times, going silent in the middle of a casual conversation because a thought suddenly captured her attention. She fidgets with her hands, adjusts her breathing, or stares at a point on the wall when she needs to reset. These small habits give her a tightly coiled, introspective feel. Her personal life mirrors this careful, slightly unusual rhythm. Keira avoids unnecessary publicity, dislikes social media, and keeps her private world sharply protected. She reads constantly, writes long journal entries, and surrounds herself with objects that hold meaning rather than aesthetic value. She prefers quiet mornings, long walks, and intimate gatherings where conversations have emotional depth. Friends describe her as kind, thoughtful, and surprisingly funny once she relaxes, but also intensely private, with a tendency to disappear into her own head even during social moments. Keira Knightley's weirdness is intellectual, subtle, and rooted in deep emotional analysis. She feels the world sharply, questions everything, and maintains a quiet intensity that makes her one of Hollywood's most quietly, eccentric, and fascinating actresses. 1. Natalie Portman. Natalie Portman has a controlled, cerebral kind of weirdness, the sort that hides behind discipline, intelligence, and a calm exterior that rarely cracks in public. She presents herself with precision, but underneath that polished surface is a deeply intense inner world shaped by anxiety, intellectual obsession, and emotional patterns that don't always match the expectations placed on her. People often describe a quiet volatility in her presence, a sharpness in the eyes, a feeling that she is processing 5 layers of thought while speaking only one. Her interviews expose this immediately. Natalie speaks with academic clarity, but her answers occasionally drift into unexpected territory. She jumps from emotional confession to scientific explanation without warning, revealing personal fears with a strangely detached tone. She taps her fingers when thinking, folds her hands in repeated patterns, or drops her gaze mid-sentence as though correcting herself internally. There are moments where she seems fully present, then suddenly distant, not aloof, but overwhelmed by the weight of her own thoughts. Interviewers often describe her as brilliant, intense, and difficult to predict, with a seriousness that feels slightly out of place in casual conversation. Her acting process adds more fuel to her unusual aura. Natalie prepares with extreme immersion. She researches obsessively, writes pages of emotional notes, and breaks down characters with a level of analysis closer to psychology than performance. She practices emotional triggers in private, using breathwork, posture shifts, and small physical rituals to reach the emotional temperature she needs. Crew members say she sometimes slips into a quiet, focused trance before scenes, pacing slowly or sitting in complete stillness while she builds tension inside herself. Once the camera rolls, she releases everything with clean precision, like flipping a switch only she can see. On set, Natalie maintains a mix of warmth and caution. She is polite, collaborative, and professional, yet often pulls away between takes to rebuild her emotional structure. She is sensitive to pressure and noise, reacting with tight posture or clipped responses when overwhelmed. Co-stars mention her tendency to withdraw into thought without warning, staring into the distance while she recalibrates internally. She works with a level of intensity that can feel intimidating, especially when she is carrying heavy emotional material. Her personal life mirrors this blend of discipline and quiet strangeness. Natalie prefers quiet routines, long reading sessions, and environments where she can maintain emotional control. She journals extensively, analyzing her own thoughts and patterns with academic curiosity. She keeps sentimental objects arranged neatly, values structured spaces, and often disappears from public view for months at a time to regain balance. Friends describe her as thoughtful, deeply sensitive, and sometimes difficult to read, a person who feels everything sharply but expresses emotion in controlled, deliberate doses. Natalie Portman's weirdness is intellectual, private, and shaped by intense sensitivity. She is not chaotic or theatrical. Her strangeness lives in the tension between her brilliant mind and her emotional vulnerability, making her one of the most complex and quietly eccentric actresses in Hollywood. Hollywood is full of polished images, but these actresses prove that the most captivating figures are often the ones who do not fit the mold. Their habits, instincts, and emotional rhythms run differently from the glossy world around them, and that strange edge is exactly what makes them unforgettable. Some drift through life in their own dreamlike atmosphere. Others live with sharp intensity, fierce intuition, or quiet chaos. But every one of them reminds us that the most interesting people in this industry are rarely the most perfect. They are the most unpredictable. If you want more countdowns like this, exploring the unusual, the unsettling, and the oddly fascinating sides of Hollywood, make sure you subscribe. There are many more stories waiting,